Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
We are on chapter 6 of the book of Exodus, of Parshat Va'era, hanging out around verses 7, 8, 9. Really 7 and 8, in those verses that we know from the Haggadah about the languages of redemption. We spoke about that last week and probably the time before that, how it's hard to really understand how the number 4 iconically jumped off of these verses, particularly because there's more than 4 active verbs that God is doing, and it's probably an ex post facto mapping of a number that was already significant in the Pesach culture back onto these verses. And depending on how quickly we go today, which is because we never go quickly, we might get to one of the strangest Rashis in the Torah, not in terms of like the content, but the methodology, right? You've all studied enough Rashis that you'll know right away that as soon as we jump into it on verse 9, the third Rashi on verse 9, it will be sui generis. Let's see if we get there. We're not rushing to get there. If we get there, we certainly won't finish it because it's also one of the longest comments of Rashi in the Torah. Okay, but let's read verse 7 because it's verse 8 that we're really going to focus on. So to get us going, verse 7, V'lakachti etchem li la'am, I will take you to me as a people. V'hayiti lachem Elohim, I will be to you as God or as a Lord. V'yidatem, and you will know. Ki ani Adonai Elohechem. Once again, invoking the Yud He Vav He. I am Adonai, your God. Which God? I'm Adonai. Hamotzi etchem. We spoke about this. Is this a present tense word the way we think of it in English, or is this an adjectival verb? The taker out of you. Terrible English, but you know what I mean. Hamotzi etchem, the one who takes you out. Mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, from underneath the burdens of Egypt. And we discussed how Rashi is trying to make it even more clear than it obviously is, that the burdens of Egypt are the burdens that Egypt has imposed upon you, as opposed to other possible syntactical way of understanding. It wouldn't make sense in content, but in syntax, which is Egypt's burdens, like the burdens that Egypt is experiencing. Okay, that was verse 7. We did the Rashis on verse 7, and I think we're about to get to verse 8. I don't remember if we read it, but I know we didn't do the Rashis, so we'll read it again. Let's start. Larry, do you have enough voice to read verse 8?
Probably not. Sorry.
Okay. Alan, you want to read verse 8?
Okay, verse 8. V'heveti etchem el ha'aretz asher nasati et yadi latet ota la'Avraham li'Yitzhak li'Yaakov v'natati ota lachem morasha ani Adonai. Good. 2 very picayune pronunciation edits that I only give to you because I know you'll appreciate them, because the syllable that is stressed is important, particularly in biblical text. It's not veheveti as it would be in modern Hebrew, but veheveti. Right, that's what the trap is. Veheveti etchem. And it's v'natati ota lachem morasha ani Adonai. Has to do with what happens to which syllables are stressed on avav v'yipuch. But now you can translate. All right, just a question about v'natati, because it looks like there's the emphasis, the metag or something, v'natati after the nun there. The main emphasis is where the trup is, v'natati. The metag, that little vertical line next to the kamash, the nun, says you have like a half emphasis or a quarter emphasis, if you really wanted to be precise. So if you really wanted to give sound to that when you were laning, it would be like the Abraham li'Yitzchak li'Yaakov v'natati ota lachem. But that's really a deep dive. Where the trup is where the main syllable emphasis is. Rick, you have a comment on that?
No,
only to say, look at the word in front of it. U Yaakov, you got one under the U, you got one under the Yud. So yeah, obviously you're absolutely right, Rabbi. There's short vowels, there's half long vowels. Yeah. So they're all over the place, but the trope is the main stress point.
The metegs are interesting in real, like Alice in the Wonderland, down the rabbit hole, grammatical surgery on each word. But in terms of pronunciation, you follow the trope, not the meteg.
Okay, good to know. I've learned something new already, which is always a good thing. Okay, and I will bring you to the land that I promised or swore to give to you, to give you to Abraham, to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and I will give you an inheritance. I will give you for your inheritance. I am Adonai. Good. So I want to interrogate your decision, an interesting decision, to translate Asher Nasati et Yadi like as a colloquialism or as an idiom as opposed to the words. What do the words mean, Asher Nasati et Yadi? That Nasati, that I carried my hand, that my hand Nasati. Hard to make sense of, right? Nasati can mean carry, lift, bear, right? Yeah. Translate the sentence literally, you'd be in a bit of a trouble, right? That my hand carried. That I raised my hand to give to you. It is God in like fourth grade that God has to raise God's hand. So look at the Onkelos for a second, because you might have been like Baruch Shekivanta. You kind of translated the phrase the way Onkelos renders it. Onkelos here is very not literal, right? So if you go back to the beginning of the Onkelos translation, Va'il, I will lift you up, or I will enter you. Actually, more enter than lift you up. I will enter Yadchun you la'aretz, to the land. D, that kiamit b'memri, that I establish with my word, which is a version of saying promise. L'mitanyata, to give it. L'Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov. So Onkelos knows that there is a Aramaic word for nasati and an Aramaic word for yadi, but he doesn't go there. He translates that I lifted up my hand to mean that I establish with my word. So other people on Zoom around the table, what do we think is going on here? Why do those words mean what other possible ways of translating the verse, and why do we think those words might mean what Onkelos is translating them as? And by the way, we'll read Ever Fox later, because Ever Fox kind of steals some of Rashi's thunder. Rick? And then Joanna?
Hi. So over the weekend, I just saw some videos on Egypt, and the gods, they raise their hands to swear things, and it's a sign of peace and all that, but it's the motion of swearing, you know. So if even to this day, right, to lift your hand in a court is a sign of swearing. So you're saying, therefore, the Torah dibra b'lashon b'nei Adam, that the Torah speaks the language of human beings, and even though God doesn't have a hand and God doesn't have to do anything other than to be God and to swear, God says, this is the land that I promised by doing the thing that humans do when they promise, doing this, to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, possibility. Joanna, Renee, then Barry, and then Stevie, and then Joel. And we're definitely not going to get to that long Rashi today. Go ahead, Joanna.
For a God that we say has doesn't have corporal form, and we spend so much time talking about that, we use a lot of human imagery to talk about God. And it seems to me when we do that, we're trying to express some incredible sort of end of the spectrum, right? And it's particularly poignant here because we're coming upon a metaphor that we're all going to see over and over again. And we all know intuitively not to translate it literally every time we see Biyad Chazaka Vizro and Netuya. Yeah. And I'm also thinking like about the expression vayichar af, in terms of, talking about God's nose when God is angry. So it seems to me there is something powerful and poetic about using body parts, even though we don't really talk about God corporally, in order to convey sort of the intensity of what is happening.
Great, Joanna. Vayichar af is a great example because you never see Vayichar af to explain that God's nostrils were inflamed. It is translated as, and God was angry. So we jump over the idiom, or jump to the idiom without paying attention to the words, which is what Onkelos does here. We'll see Rashi and then Everett Fox. There's a way to fuse them, but Onkelos doesn't even bother with the body imagery. You'll go straight to what Onkelos thinks the meaning of the phrase would be. Very good. Renee?
I was going to say something similar to what you brought up, that it reminded me of an oath in court when you raise your hand. And also, it's really interesting in my translation, when it refers to the hand, it capitalizes the word my. So I don't know if it did that for any particular reason, but it kind of emphasized the oath. To me, it just seemed like it was emphasizing the oath part.
Yes, sometimes translations will give a capital letter to a pronoun that refers to God, right? Whether it's an individual pronoun or a possessive pronoun, right? In translations that render God a he or a him, sometimes that H will have a capital letter. It's like trying to use the conventions of the English language, which the Torah could not have anticipated and didn't know, to add some divine gravitas to what is just a mundane pronoun.
And Everett Fox also refers to it as an oath more specifically.
Hold on. We're going to we'll do the Everett Fox after the Rashi.
Okay. Sorry.
Barry.
Do we know what this is referring to, the right hand or the left hand? I'm assuming it's the right hand. In Zohar and in Kabbalah, the right side is the Yitzhak, the judgmental.
I can't hear him too well, Barry.
Is that better? Can you hear me now? Hello?
He's shaking his head, yes.
Yes, that's better.
I can't see you shaking your head. In Kabbalah Zohar, the right side is Yitzhak, judgment, power, and I believe it's the right hand of God that came through Egypt to do what had to be done, so the raising of the hand here is the symbol of God's power and to come about.
Okay, Stevie.
Yeah, what jumps out for me is what we're going to lane in a couple of weeks is Simnai Yadecha Tachat Yireichi, right? That when Abraham has his servant swear to him, he says, take your hand, and where we get the Latin root testify. But that, do
you want to spell that out or not?
Take your hand and place it under my leg or something like that. But this was a custom for oathing things, and that's where the Latin root testify comes from.
Yeah. Good, right.
So, but that a hand is used in that process.
Yeah.
And that's just what I assumed this meant.
Right. So a hand is used sometimes with other human body parts to make an oath, and this is also now a reference not to placing the hand under something, but actually some kind of a raising. Right. Okay. Yes, Sue. Give Sue the mic.
We're obviously they haven't left Mitzrayim yet, but we are going to get to Yad Chazakah v'Zarah Netuyah, and it makes me think that a lot of what we talk about having to do with the land has to do with the hands. That's all.
Yeah, that's similar to what Joanna said, that we're going to be confronting that imagery all the time. And again, we talk about this so frequently in this class, which is wonderful. What is language? Language is an articulation of syllables that's supposed to put a certain picture in our mind, right? So when we say Biad Chazakah Uvizroa Netuyah in Hebrew, for those of us who know Hebrew, or that God took us out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, an interesting question is, what do you see when you hear those words in your head? What do you think? Are you thinking Popeye, or are you already doing the jump to representing in your mind the power that metaphor, that anthropomorphic metaphor is making us think about, right? It's an interesting question in general. I once heard a comic, I hope I don't regret saying what I'm about to say, talking about how silly it is that it's a wonderful thing that the N-word is not recited in, is not used in common speech, right? It's a terrible word. But he says what he hates more than the word that begins with letter N, has 5 more letters, is the phrase the N-word. Because you get away with saying the N-word without saying it, and then you make me think that word. Like that's what happens when you say the words, the N-word, you're making me think of the word you don't want to say out loud. That's what language is, right? So why that's any much better than saying it, he's not quite sure. So here, yeah.
Can I just add that if that is the image of Simnai Lecha Tachat Yerechi, then the vow is sort of more directed to the recipient of the vow than simply a blanket statement.
Yeah, right. So let's hear from Diane and Larry, and then we'll go into the Rashi on the verse.
This is a shameless plug for this week's Haftorah Plethora. So Rick and I were discussing it. And of course, this vow is referring to the Brit Ben Betarim, which is where God is promising Abraham that his offspring will inherit the land. And of course, in that passage was chapter 15 of Lech Lecha, he doesn't raise his hand at all. There's no reference to his making the vow by raising his hand. The brit is done over the parts of various animals that Abraham is sacrificing.
It's the Jewish laser from the sky.
Right. And Rick and I, I struggled, Rick doesn't struggle, to see the connection between the Haftarah, which only mentions Abraham once, and the Parsha. So we kind of discussed this issue as well.
Thanks, Larry. Ilan and then Sue. Let's give Ilan a microphone. This one seems to be better. But there you go.
Yeah, just a question not related to the I have raised my hand, but to the last phrase, which is Ani Adonai. Why the need to repeat that for the third time in 3 sentences? Did he think that it was possibly his brother-in-law speaking instead? What's the why the repetition? There must be some reason, because it would be wasteful otherwise.
Yeah. When we get to the book of Leviticus, which is a long time away, there are series of laws given that all seem to end Ani Adonai, Ani Adonai. And the same question continues. Like it can't be to tell us who's speaking, as if there's a chance that we might not have known who was speaking, right? And of course, there's no one answer to the question why Ani Adonai comes. In this scene, it's already not long ago in verses. There's been a whole there's been a whole conversation about how God is now in a situation of finally fulfilling a promise that God made to the ancestors, and it's the fulfilling of promises aspect of the divinity that is most Yud He Vav-ish, right? Now, that's a midrash. That doesn't jump off the page. But Rashi worked hard to get us to believe that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they knew my name was Yud He Vav He, but they never really got to experience my full Yud He Vav He-ness because I never fulfilled the most significant promise I was going to make to them, which is this one. So Rashi would say, even though he doesn't say it on this verse, he said it before, maybe the Ani Hashem is once again God saying, you can trust me, and the dead ancestors can retroactively trust me. I am indeed Adonai, not just Elohim. That's one. Right. Correct. That is correct. Sue and then Barry.
Well, this is a little weird, but I'm just sitting here thinking, that the land, what if we married? The land is the hand of God. I mean, why is it so important for the Israelites to return there and for, all of eternity for the Jews to be settled in Israel. And if we're not going to anthropomorphize God, then perhaps what we need to do is dwell in the hand of God.
You're saying so
the
read
it.
this not metaphorically, read it as linking the land of Israel to the hand of God itself.
Right.
Yeah.
I lifted it up where the it is the land, not the hand.
Good, interesting midrash. Yeah. Barry?
Piggyback on that before you go on.
Yeah.
What you talked about at the Baruch Ling thing, that et could also mean im.
Right.
I lifted it with my hand.
Nasati et yad, that I lifted it at yadi with my hand. Very nice. Barry?
I get the sense that the Aniyat Hashem so frequent. It's like a verbal seal, sealing the document. Every time God's making some statement, it's being sealed.
Yeah. So a certain kind of coda. I see Joanna's hand, and then we'll start looking at the Rashi.
So talking about sealing the document, I want to say it's perhaps the language of, like, again, speaking metaphorically, sealing the ketubah. If you look at verse 7, we often elide over the vehayiti, I think because the rabbis have, so planted in our heads what are the 4 verbs of redemption in these verses.
Right.
But vilakachti vehayiti is very interesting because that's the language of marriage in Breshit. Someone took someone, and then that person was a wife to Isaac, in the case of Isaac or whoever. Now, nasati also becomes a very interesting word because of nisuin. And the other word I want to jump to is morasha, because we heard morasha translated as inheritance, which I think maybe perhaps is better expressed by from the same cognate, Yerusha. So if Yerusha is inheritance, what is morasha? And I want to say a heritage. And what's the difference? An inheritance I don't have to work for. Someone gives me a present, voila, I have it. A morasha, a heritage, I have to claim it. And so now there's, we've heard a lot about what God is doing here, but there's some language here of like, you're going to have what to do also. This is a partnership. This is a marriage. And you have to claim, after all is said and done, you have to claim your inheritance. You have to work to keep, not your inheritance, you have to claim your heritage. You have to work to keep that. And then I think now also the Ani Adonai has become very interesting because the second one is after Velakachti Vehayiti. And the third one is after Morasha. So God is asserting the partnership. I am God, and you are the other half of the partnership.
Very nice, Joanna. Particularly the first thing you said, your sensitivity to how vocab words and particularly verbs are grouped in one setting and how they might link to another topic within Jewish thought is really wonderful, because I could have read those verses 100 times and never would have lassoed them together as you have. I want to just emphasize what Joanna said, because now that I see it, I can't unsee it, that the verbs of verse 7 and 8, which begin with the last of the 4, like the rabbis lassoed the 3 verbs in verse 6 and the the first verb of verse 7 to be the 4 verbs of the redemption. But if you lasso together the first verb of verse 7, lakachti, the second verb of verse 7, vayiti, and then the verb in the middle of verse 8, v'nasati, a different, like the bullseye is now in the center of the arrow is in the center of a different bullseye, and those are all marriage verbs, absolutely, right? The kikach ish isha is from the verb lakach, to take. To be espoused to someone is always expressed in the verb to be, and then nasati nisuin. So that's really a lovely trio. I'd never picked up on that, particularly as God is thinking ahead to the Sinai moment, which is not mentioned here explicitly, but is it's alluded to, which we think of certainly midrashically as a wedding. Very nice. Rebecca Leonard, and then I promise we'll get to the Rashi.
Hi. So Nechama Leibowitz has a different take on this here.
Okay.
Looking at verses 2 through 8, this is one giant chiasma, and beginning and ending with "I am the Lord," and and there's like 4 parts in here that get repeated. Start at the beginning and then repeated in reverse order at the end. The chiasma is a dominant feature of the whole passage, which opens and closes with the refrain, "I am the Lord." Second comes a reference to the patriarchs who were the first to experience the divine revelation. Accordingly, they were referred to again in the last phrase but one. Similarly, third comes the promised land, mentioned again before the reference to the patriarchs. Fourth comes the bondage, and likewise the fourth from the end, the theme is repeated. The divine peroration falls naturally into 2 sections, the address to Moses and the message he is to bring the people. And the latter is divided into 2 subsections, referring respectively to the Exodus and the entry to the Promised Land. So again, if you look at this in a chiastic structure, I can't really show it too well here at the moment, but you can see how it was, diagrammed over here, that this is one giant poem, that with a very distinct structure.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Leonard. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Let's go to Rashi, and then we're going to read Ibn Ezra, which I'll pull up on the screen in case y'all don't have it. And then we will look at Everett Fox. So back to you, Sue. Sue needs a microphone, right? Now, who is reading? Sue is reading?
I am. Alan.
No, thank you.
Alan.
Yeah.
Okay. Vinasati et yadi, harimotiha, lahashava bechisi, that I will raise it to swear on my chair, on my throne.
Past tense, harimoti ota.
Oh, I raised it to swear on my throne.
Okay, so Rashi does several things in 3 words. He translates nasati as harimotiha, which is his way of saying nasa can mean many different things. What it means here is lift. And then he turns the et yadi, my hand, into just the unspoken direct object of harimotiha, and then gives us this language of oath, right? I lifted up my anthropomorphic hand, lehishava, to swear bekisi, upon my throne. What does that last word do in this comment? Like, if we didn't have it, we would understand that Rashi's saying, it's an idiom, it means to swear, we get the point. Like, and we do have a notion of God's throne, but what is this phrase bekisi, that upon or to my chair? What does it add to this, our understanding of this verse? And what might it be an allusion to? Anyone want to?
The only thing, my only guess about this is it's talking about God's power, about God's kingship, and his ability to be able to uphold his promise to be able to bring the people, out from Egypt. In that sense, it adds more of a royalty and power component to it.
So what's the anthropomorphic image? Even if we're not supposed to think anthropomorphically, what are we supposed to, before we jump out of the anthropomorphism, what are we supposed to be imagining God doing? God down here lifting God's hand up to the throne? We're supposed to imagine God on God's throne lifting God's hand? How do you see that, Alan? What you just
I would see it as God being on God's throne in the anthropomorphic sense, and raising his hand to be able to do everything from above.
So Bikisi is God saying, I, sitting upon my throne up there, while I was also talking to Abraham down here, harimotia, I lifted my hand. I was up there on my throne. Avram was down there. I was talking to Abraham, but you didn't see it, folks. But I did this, and so I said I promise. That's the image, Alan?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, good. Joanna and then Rebecca Leonard.
So I think by using this language, one, it's setting up a contrast to Paro. All of a sudden, we're comparing Paro on his throne to God on his throne. And the other thing is, the moment you have me thinking about the word throne and you use the word hand, I now start to think about what's in your hand, the scepter. And now I'm in Megillat Esther. And you know what happens when Achashverosh extends his hand on his scepter or doesn't? And you know, there's some power, you know, a sense of like, this is a shorthand way of saying like, Bnei Israel has found favor in God's eyes. That
Nice. I want to share with you. I think I do this technologically. I'm going to put it on here and then share screen so everyone can see it. Okay, so some of the super commentaries on Rashi make the point that God is not just referring in general. Rashi is not just referring in general to Kisei Hashem, but to this particular verse, which is the opening line of, I forgot which Haftarah, something over the summer. Ko Amar Adonai Hashemayim Kisi. This is the last chapter of the book of Isaiah, by the way. Thus says God, Hashemayim Kisi, the heavens are my throne, V'ha'aretz Hadom Raglai, but my feet come all the way down to the ground. That's my footstool. Where could you, since I span from up there to down here, how are you going to build a home for me, right? So the notion is that in Isaiah says in God's name that, yes, I dwell down there. That's when I speak to you. That's when I'm involved in human activities. But my throne really is a supernal heavenly throne, and there is a verticality to it, right? So the super commentaries are saying that Rashi is saying that this verse is connected to a later Isaiah verse, that when God goes like this, God is kind of both either pointing us up towards there, or God wants us to imagine that it's up there that things that matter in God's realm are actually happening. So I was on my throne, I lifted my hand, it was a promise, I'm good for it. Rosemary, you want to give Rosemary the microphone? Yeah. Right.
I'm kind of more thinking of nowadays, when you're going to take a loan from the bank, you put your house in, and God in a way is showing, I lift my hand, that's sure, but I have a throne also. Yeah. So that's guarantee for me.
Good, like the guarantee, correct, the collateral. Okay, now that we've read Rashi on this, I want to read to you Everett Fox, who, as we know, is our most literal of translators that we normally have around the table, and that makes it very hard in this verse. I will bring you into the land, right? So that's pretty plain. But nasati etchem heveti etchem el haaretz. I'll bring you to the land. He adds in the following word in parentheses, over, and parentheses, which I lifted my hand, right? So the land regarding which I lifted my hand, and he puts in another parentheses, in an oath, to give to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov. I will give it to you as a possession, going back to Joanna, not Joanna, but she's gone. Joanna's comment that it's the difference between Morashah and Yerusha, I, Yud, He, Vav, He, right? So he, as a literal translator, keeps in the phrase my hand, but he adds in words in parentheses, which he does not do very often. He tries very hard to just render it into an English using each word, but he feels like he has to add in the in an oath so that you don't actually just think it's a physical raising of hand that doesn't symbolize something beyond that. Let me just see, there's a chat comment here. Oh yeah, Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, correct, thank you. So when I said over the summer, the answer is sometimes. Great. I guess I forgot that Joanna has to leave early sometimes. So Joanna, we miss you. Anything else on verse 8? All right. Let's go to.
Sorry, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I couldn't get to the raised hand. Once again, JPS. I have a criticism of JPS. It makes a liar out of God. So the JPS translation is, I will bring you into the land which I swore. And Alter's translation is, I will bring you to the land. And Kaplan's translation is also to the land, because God did not bring Moses and that generation into the land. He only brought them to the edge of the land and not into the land.
Well, the people were brought in, just not Moshe. And this is now, we're in a quotation mark, what God is telling Moshe to say to the people.
Right, but my understanding was that wasn't that generation died out in the desert?
Right. So it could be read as an etchem. You, whatever representatives of this people, will still be alive when I finally bring you in. Yeah.
Right.
How does Kaplan do the Nasati at Yadi?
Oh, he does the same way Alter does, which is as the idiom. He says, I will bring you to the land regarding which I raised my hand.
Regarding which, yeah.
And then brackets swearing. And then and Alter does the same thing.
Similar to Everett Fox, yeah.
Right, and Alter does exactly the same thing. He says, I will bring you to the land that I raised my hand in pledge. And then both of them comment in their comments below that it's an idiom.
Yeah. I actually wanted to read Ibn Ezra. I think I pulled it up. Yeah. Let me share that screen. Don't have it on in front of you. So this is Ibn Ezra on who's a real daktakan. He's very precise with his language and his grammar. On the phrase v'tam and the reason, the understanding of asher nasati et yadi, which I lifted up my hand. Derech mashal. This is a metaphor. Ibn Ezra says, ki adam, like a human, sheyisa yado el hashamayim v'yishava, like a person who will raise his hand upwards to the heavens if there isn't a thigh around to put it under, and swear, kamo ki esa el shamayim yadi, like he quotes from Deuteronomy 32, that for I lift up my hand to the heaven, vayarem yimino usmolo el hashamayim, and a verse from the book of Daniel. So Ibn Ezra has no problem just saying quite plainly, it's just a metaphor. Sometimes a metaphor is staring us plainly in the face, and we don't have to work so hard to imagine a divine hand. And elsewhere, super commentaries on Rashi, which would say the same thing about Ibn Ezra, but there are far fewer super commentaries on Ibn Ezra than Rashi is. Again, HaTorah dibra b'lashon bnei adam. Torah is using language that we would understand. We understand raising hand means an oath. Doesn't mean that God has a hand. Okay, let's go to verse 9. Joel, you want to read verse 9?
Me?
Yeah.
וידבר משה כן אל בני ישראל, ולא שמעו אל משה מקוצר רוח ומעבודה קשה.
Okay, translate.
And Moses said this or thus.
Because the previous verses were all in God saying to Moses, say this to the Israelites, right? So we end the double quotation mark because we end what God wanted Moshe to say, and we end God's speech that God has been saying for several verses. So now we're back to an action item, right?
To the children of Israel, but they did not hear Moshe from impatience or frustration and from hard work.
Good. So on the heels of a verse where words about God's body we read idiomatically, there could be an instinct to read the phrases in this verse also idiomatically, right? Because you went to impatience. How else did you translate Kotzei Ruach? Frustration. What does it literally mean?
Shortness of breath.
Yeah, shortness of breath or spirit, right? So it does make us wonder what are those words trying to convey in terms of what the Israelites' experience were, such that they were not able to shomea. And let's also remember, because we're going to have to linger on this, what are the different possibilities that even the word shomea can mean in this verse? Shomea can mean
hear or listen.
Hear, listen, or even like more intensive, obey, right? Right. So is it the letter Shin Mem Ayin can refer to something auditory, or some kind of a commitment that you make based on what you hear, right? So we're not sure which is the shamu that is being referred to here, nor are we fully certain, just in these words, if we're supposed to understand kotzer ruach as some kind of physiological shortness of spirit, or some a breath, or something more emotional. But we also have the hard work that they were experiencing as well. This verse would even be more interesting if the u in between kotzer ruach and me'avodah kasha were not there, because there's a temptation to read it as they did not hear or heed Moshe because of the kotzer ruach. Why do they have kotzer ruach? Whatever it means, me'avodah kasha. But the u suggests that there were two things: both the kotzer ruach and the avodah kasha made it hard for them. Just look at Unkelos quickly. Unkelos adds in a couple of words that they're not changing the meaning so much, but it's an interesting choice. So umelel Moshe, melel is diber, like you know the word milah is from the same root that has melel, a word. Moses, melel Moshe kain livnei Israel, velo kabilu min Moshe. So which version of Shema is Unkelos translating this as? Hearken or obey, right? Unkelos saying this is not listening, because he doesn't translate it into the Aramaic. There's an Aramaic word that means listen. He's not saying that. Lo kabilu min Moshe, they did not accept it from Moshe. Mima'ik rucha, from some kind of like a bitterness of spirit. Umi palchana, and the work, the burdens, the hava kasha alayhon, that was hard upon them. So instead of just translating it as a noun and an adjective, avodah kasha, he says the noun, the avodah, which was hard upon them. Right? Interesting choice. He could have just done a straight translation, chooses not to. Okay, thoughts or comments on the verse before we jump into the Rashis? Any possibilities for kotzer ruach? What does it bring up for you, Stevie?
Just the last two verses, beginning with Lachain, there's nothing required of the Bnei Israel, right? So the do not obey is an interesting like twist. It's sort of like they didn't like take it in, maybe, but there's nothing explicitly being asked of them aside from like have some hope because God is here, right? Like
that's really interesting, Stevie. Right? We're not in a mitzvah moment. We're just in a information download moment, and so it's almost as if there's a stage of shmi'ah that's in between just listening and obeying. And it's in that realm of hearkening, paying attention to, heeding, like allowing it to sink in, right? But Barry and then Larry, Diane.
Well, there's two things. One is their loss of humanity, living in Egypt. That's the distress, and then on top of that is the burdens of work. They've lost who they are as people.
Yeah, and therefore it's maybe just be impossible to take in, right? The words that they most want to take in, which is that their suffering may be over, and that might be the hardest words for them to even to assimilate. Larry, Diane? Did it get very cold in this room?
Yes. Yeah.
Like just, no? Not for you, Elon? Yeah. I feel like I'm rarely cold. In the last 5 minutes, it's gotten icy in here. Larry, Diane, and then Stevie.
So it's from
Nasaying at Yedchem. Go ahead.
So it's from verse 6 that God is telling Moses to speak to the people. So it's the previous 3 verses where Moses is giving what should be this rousing speech. So I envision it either seriously being maybe in the time of slavery, a preacher giving an exhortation to the people, but as here, they're just too downtrodden to listen, or more facetiously, a football coach who's exhorting his team who's down 50-0 at halftime, and they're just too crushed to actually listen to what he's saying. But it's pretty realistic when people try to encourage people who are down, and they're just not ready to listen to that message. I think many of us have been there. Know what it's like.
Downtrodden is a good idiomatic rendering of kotzer ruach, and that comment was said by a true Lions fan. The fact that you gave that down 50-0 at halftime example.
Exactly.
Stevie?
Yeah, just that it's only after this Lo Shamuel Moshe that God actually says, go to Pharaoh, right? It's in the next verse or two verses. So there could be some, implication that like, if Moses was received differently, then maybe everything that played out would have been different, that like going to Pharaoh would not have been the next step. Who knows what it would have been, but.
That's a fascinating possibility, Stevie. Everyone get what he's saying, that if you cheat ahead and looking at verses 10 and 11, which, by the way, are in the middle of a chapter in the Christian division of the text, but in the Torah's columns begin the next paragraph, that pay after the end of verse 9 show us that there's like a little bit of a break in the text. That's when the instruction to go back to Pharaoh is brought in, and Stevie is suggesting maybe that's an immediate reaction to the Israelites not having received or heeded this news. I'm also interested by the last use of the root Shema. Now, sometimes if a word can have several meanings, we don't have to pay too much attention as to why it means something here, something there. Sometimes it's just a pluripotent word. But the last Shema is verse 5, right before God starts this speech to Moshe, and it's God's positive ability after time to have been Shamati et Nakat b'nei Israel, to have listened to the cries of the children of Israel. That Shamati seems to be very much an anthropomorphic auditory. I heard them, and it did sink in, it did penetrate. And now, like, God is finally hearing the Israelites, and the next use of the word Shema is the Israelites, right? There's something so tragic about that. Like, there is a moment at which it's too late to finally pay attention to someone's cry. Like they may no longer be able to hear you back, right? I hate to sermonize on it, but there's the contrast to that is really poignant. God is finally listening to what the Israelites have been saying for generations. And God says, okay, I'm going to take you out. And they couldn't reciprocate the hearing because of whatever Kotze Ruach means, right? Give Rosemary the microphone.
The sentence finishes with cruel bondage. So it shows sometimes, even the parents are so tired they don't hear anymore.
Yes.
So.
Rick, and then we'll look at some translations of the verse, and then we'll jump into Rashi. I'm probably doing the very long Rashi next week.
Just to underline what you said, God says, okay. So in verse 9 there, what does Moses actually say to the people? All he says is came. So I don't know how he explained it that they didn't hear, but obviously what he said didn't work, but it looks like he didn't say much.
Meaning that you're reading it saying, and Moshe said the word yes, as opposed to, thusly. Yeah, interesting. Everett Fox on verse 9, how he deals with Kotze Ruach. Moshe spoke thus to the children of Israel, because Everett Fox disagrees with Rick Muller, but they did not hearken to Moshe. Hearken is that in between. It's somewhere between obeying and pure listening. Out of shortness of spirit, it's a great phrase. That phrase also, you could ask many questions what it means, but a shortness of spirit, and out of hard servitude. Larry, you want to read your translations?
Sure. Alter has, and Moses spoke thus to the Israelites, but they did not heed Moses out of shortness of breath and hard bondage. And Kaplan goes the other direction, and he says, and Moses related this to the Israelites, but because of their disappointment and hard work, they would no longer listen to him.
Kaplan. Oh, Kaplan. JPS also takes away the u. Remember I mentioned the u in between Kotze Ruach and Avodah Kasha to suggest there were two different things, and JPS combines them. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses, their spirits crushed, Kotze Ruach, by cruel bondage, Avodah Kasha. So obviously the Avodah Kasha is the reason for the Kotzei Ruach, but it's interesting that the Hebrew sets them apart as two separate entities. Okay. Before we Rashi, just speak like modern American English speakers. What do you think Kotzei Ruach? What image should we have in our mind when we are witness to the Israelites' Kotzei Ruach that prevented them from shomaying? Is it depression? Is it they couldn't produce sound? Right? Is it that specific to the language? Like sometimes when people who are depressed can't speak, they can't get they don't have enough air in their bellies to push out. What do we think it means? Leigh and Larry? And then Renee?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, katser is the verb that's used when you're cutting grain. Am I right?
Kitsira is harvest, correct? Gam
Right.
karashnu,
So-
lo katsarnu, correct.
So their spirits have been cut down.
Nice. Right. So the reason it means that is because the root means short. So what is a harvest? It's taking a long stalk and making it short. But you're focusing on the not just the length, but some kind of like a chopped down and diminished. Nice.
Right.
Renee, are you frozen? Oh.
I think it's impatience, but also I wanted to ask you what eugoretic means, because in Everett Fox he says that a eugoretic phrase probably means wretchedness.
Ugaritic is one of the very early Mesopotamian languages that is a precognate of Hebrew. So it's like what Ugaritic and Akkadian were some of the languages that were spoken by other nations way back when. Yeah.
But I think it's short impatience because of also katzal. Something that's short.
Yeah. Anyone else around the table or on the Zoom? What you think of when you hear Kotzei Ruach, knowing what the words literally mean? What does it make you think of? Okay, so let's look at the Rashi. We'll probably get to just not the third one. It was just by the way, peek ahead. You'll see what I mean about how long the third comment of Rashi is on this verse. But let's see. We'll go with the first two, or at least the first one. Below Shamu.
V'lo shamu et Moshe.
El Moshe.
El Moshe. They did not listen to hearken to Moshe. Lo kiblu tanchumin. So this is like what Larry says. They didn't accept his consolation.
Correct, right? So first of all, he agrees with Uncle S and renders Shema as the root kabal. This is not having to do with their ears. The problem wasn't their ears. The problem was the taking in of that which their ears had already heard into their heart. Why do we think Rashi used the word tanchumin here? Or I'm not asking why that Hebrew vocabulary word, but why that image that they did not receive Moshe's consolation, God, his condolences.
It's like his enthusiasm. It's like what Larry was saying. They were down in the dumps, and Moshe was trying to say, no, God will bring you up, and they didn't want to even go there.
Refuse to be cheered up, or not even refuse. Impossible to be cheered up.
It might just not be enough. It's, though there he is talking, but he's going to have to show them something.
Yeah.
It's, words aren't going to do it. They're Kotzei Ruach.
Yeah. Barry, Stevie?
If we're going to use a human analogy, when a child is hurting, a parent speaking logic is not going to help. A parent's arm and hand and comfort and soothing will help. This is not happening here.
Yeah, so it's almost, I wonder if what you're saying, Barry, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that by Rashi using the word tanchumim, Rashi saying Moshe was trying to comfort them, but there was no comfort. Right? It's almost like some of that imagery from the book of Echa, right? Ein menachem la, right? That Jerusalem was so downtrodden, so demoralized. Ein menachem la can mean, and there's some midrashim on this, that there was no one there to comfort her, or comfort was impossible. At some point, someone is beyond comfort or beneath comfort, even if there is someone to comfort you, right? You don't know when it has to give testimony, but I'm sure we can all think of moments in our lives, maybe even recently, where no one could possibly have comforted us even if they wanted to, right? Ein menachem lanu. So it's just an interesting choice because in retrospect, we can look at the last 3 verses and saying, yeah, this should be some kind of a salve on the wounds of slavery. But until Rashi mentions this, we're not thinking the last few words as nechama, as comfort. It's redemption's coming. It's an interesting choice. Barry?
I go one step further, and God, instead of God's right hand coming in at this point, God's left hand would have been more appropriate.
Stevie?
Yeah, just from the Bnei Israel's perspective, the last thing that happened was that they were given responsibility for collecting straw, and it's Moses' fault, right? And then Moses turns to God after that, and then they have a conversation or several conversations. But like, I think it's sort of an open question would be, is there blame or resentment directed at Pharaoh or at Moshe or some of both? And that this verse could be an answer to that question. And I think you could read it both ways. I'm curious to see what Rashi does coming.
That's fascinating, Stevie. I really like that. Alan, you might be the last comment of the day. We can't hear you yet, though. We can see you. We can see your yad. Really.
Okay. It was more than just the work that they would have to do. There was a certain amount of fear that they were going to be killed. Because go back in 521 where they say that they're going to have, swords to be able to kill them. But what's taking place? It was, I was just looking back. It was just, it's not just the hard work, but the real fear of dying. And that would crush your spirit, take away your breath, that you would not be able to be able to breathe, in a sense, quite literally, perhaps, because you were going to die.
I will be lingering in this week on a lot of the things that we said today, but Stevie's last comment is particularly fetching because to read this verse from the Israelites' perspective, as we are being told what the Israelites were or not able to do, and then try to connect the not being able to, it doesn't say that they didn't believe God. It doesn't say that they didn't trust what God was promising, where the last 3 verses were about God's trust, but they could not heed Moshe from maybe as a result of the very Kotzei Ruach and Avodah Kashah that they are now connecting to Moshe's having intervened and made things worse. It's a lot here about how we try to make things better and we make things worse. Yeah.
And the word tanchumin, I don't know about that, but it's kind of a tefillah word, so it's sort of, it's like, well, they weren't going in for the davening to console them at the time. It's like, don't give us don't give us a few psalms. Yeah. We can't do that.
Halachically speaking, at a Shiva Minyan, and this is something very hard to do because our instinct as human beings is to be good people and try to help. At a Shiva Minyan, you're supposed to end the tefillah by saying, Hamakom minachem etchem, may God comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, and then say nothing. We don't do that. We say, how you doing? Can I bring you some coffee? But halacha says you're supposed to say that phrase and then sit and let the mourner speak or not speak, but you don't impose speech upon them. And I think the understanding in 2,000-year-old psychology is they just might not be ready for any tanchumim. Doesn't mean that you don't want to offer it, but their kotzei ruach might be so severe that your attempt, even to be the nicest and most consoling that you can be, will fail. Right? As a rabbi, I have a hard time doing it. The Shiva Minyan's over, and I give a hug and I say, "How are you?" Right? Because it's so weird not to. But there's a wisdom to the halakha saying, don't say anything. And you're not saying anything isn't being cruel. It feels like you're being cruel. How can I not have a comfort? But you're not saying anything might actually be giving them the space to say, no one can comfort me right now. To just sit with me. Have a great week, everyone. We'll do that long Rashi. We probably won't even finish it. It's a very long Rashi next week.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.